Thanks, Lori. Jonesborough has always been a bustling town, and this hasn't changed since its founding in 1779. Although the town might not be particularly large in size, especially compared to other cities, but its position as a seat of political power and its location on a very prominent stage road helped propel Jonesborough to lofty economic heights prior to the Civil War. There's this well-held stereotype that Appalachia is isolated and that the people who live there are backwards, simple folk. Well, this myth of the mountains has been perpetuated for centuries, and it was a shock to several travelers who came through Jonesborough in the early 19th century that this tiny town was an economic powerhouse. Local merchants used the stage road to make connections to larger markets up north, and they were able to offer a level of goods in Jonesborough that one would typically find in a much larger city like Philadelphia or Boston. David Dederick was one of Jonesborough's many savvy merchants, and his newspaper ads proclaimed that David Dederick hath just received from Philadelphia and Baltimore and is now opening for sale a very handsome and general assortment of goods, which ranged from fabrics, combs, locks, and knives to books, spices, saddles, and pewter. Well, this was still the frontier though, and barter and trade items included skins, furs, beeswax, and flax. Dederick also offered cash for the best otter, black and gray fox, raccoon, wildcat, muskrat, and mink skins. As late as 1857, there were stores on Main Street that would accept bear skins as payment. By the second decade of the 19th century, store owner John G. Eason was offering a large and elegant assortment of seasonable and well-selected British, French, and American dry goods. Jonesborough was also filled with intrepid entrepreneurs in iron, timber, and brick. A large building boom during the 1840s and 1850s produced several of the buildings that dot Main Street today, including 3 of the 4 churches. Well, in an 1857 travelogue from Harper's New Monthly magazine, Jonesborough was referred to as having an old-fashioned, substantial air, as if the people who built it intended to live there for the rest of their days. The writer also noted that the town had several academies of some architectural pretension. It may be odd for us to think of today, but there was a moment in history when Jonesborough was the economic engine of the region. This was never quite the country, but it was never quite a big city either. Perhaps Jonesborough has always been the best of both worlds.
It's always good to get that historical perspective. There are several people in town, though, who carry this historical perspective with them because, well, they've lived through a lot of history. Mary Nell Robinson, at 91 years old, well, she's right here in the front row. She has nearly 100 years of memories about downtown. The Daughters of the American Revolution did an oral history project just a few years ago when Mary Nell was a mere 88 years old. She, along with other long-standing community members like Alfred Greenlee, Becky Poteet Sims, Jimmy Ryan, Virginia Maiden, Sidney Smallwood, and others, they got together to share their memories of growing up in town. Sadly, many of them have since passed away. But because their stories were gathered and preserved, all of them continue to live on as we hear their stories. These are just a few recollections of town living. Next stop, Jonesborough, circa 1930.
And Miss Mary Nell, I hope you don't mind, I'm going to be you tonight. Earlier than 1930. If we're going to start somewhere, we'll start at the beginning. I was born on 105 South 3rd Avenue in 1926. My name is Mary Nell, and I suppose if you live in Jonesborough, you know who I am, because I've been here nearly 100 years. I've lived all up and down this town, too. I guess I'd be what you'd call a town mouse. And I can recall so many changes downtown through the years because I was here when it happened. There's a mural painted over the desk in our Jonesborough Visitor Center. Go see it if you haven't, and you'll see a tiny little bit of my life is in it. It's a look at downtown made from Academy Hill condominiums, which is Jonesborough School where I went to school for 12 years. In the painting, you see the Methodist Church where I've gone all my life. Then there's the Sisters Row where I lived as a little child. Then we moved on out to what's now 402 East Lane. The Baptist Church shown in that mural is where my dog waited for me when I walked home from school. Then the next house, Tom and Peggy Root, who painted the mural, they live in the house now. That is where I grew up. So all the places in that mural, all the places downtown, They have a special meaning to me. I remember when so much of it changed, too. There wasn't a whole lot of cars in Jonesborough then, but there was a few. 11E went right through downtown Jonesborough out to East Main Street. The new highway was built in '32. I remember it.
You remember that?
I do. I was younger than you when it happened. I remember because the man who was over construction was from Alabama. He had a daughter that was in the 2nd grade with me, and I got a new friend.
I remember that too.
Well, Alfred Greenlee, you sure would. Alfred and I grew up together in Jonesborough.
Did everything but go to school together. Baseball games at Duncan Meadow, fishing in Little Limestone Creek, hog killings, TV nights with Ed Sullivan, when all the neighbors would get together and watch.
Yeah.
You could say I'm a town mouse too. Never lived anywhere else other than downtown Jonesborough. Been through a lot of changes, but something about it stays the same.
I think it's the people.
You mean the people who've been here 100 years like you?
Oh, honey, I'm talking about the kind of people. Warm and kind.
And love a good story. No matter the other changes, those kind of people seem to be who lives here. Even when the big road came, bringing more people, that road we're talking about, they were building that road just a little bit before '32. If you can imagine, the main highway out of Johnson City, it went to 2nd Avenue and turned left, went down to Depot Street, crossed the railroad track, and that's where I live, there on the 300 block of Depot Street. At this time, West Main Street just went out to a point and just stopped. And there, like you said, they didn't build it up until, what, 33, 34?
Mm-hmm.
Somewhere along in there. That's when they opened it up and built that bridge right on through.
It made a big difference in traffic and people moving here.
Well, to some folks who had cars, in 33, 34, our family didn't have cars.
There weren't cars in Jonesborough way back then?
Oh, there were a few. We had a car because my daddy was a traveling salesman. Well, I should say he had the car. We didn't.
Well, how did you get places?
TP and W.
What?
TP and W. Take pains and walk.
Honey, when we were your age, we'd be excited to see 4 or 5 cars drive down the road in one day.
I was born on Main Street, 510 Main Street. One of our major occupations on a rainy day was to sit in the window and count cars that went by. On a good day, we might even get 10. I always looked for the ones that teenage boys fixed up with paint. Back then, cars came in black. If you wanted another color, you painted it yourself. When I was 4 years old, we moved to 314 West Main Street, on the corner next to the schoolhouse. All I had to do was get up in the morning, grab some breakfast, and walk to the edge. And I was at school. That went on through 8th grade.
We all walked. No such thing as a bus back then.
We walked home for lunch, too, a lot of us. I went home for lunch every day. I'd never eaten in the cafeteria. But one day, my mother had to be gone for lunch, and she gave me money to eat in the cafeteria. I was thrilled to death to get to do that because I had seen those little milk bottles, and I wanted to drink milk out of one of those little bottles. Now, I've forgotten what we had for our main meal, but for dessert, they had glazed donuts. And I had never eaten a glazed donut. My mother made homemade donuts, but they were cake donuts. And when I bit into that donut, a lot of that glaze had gone back in the hole and about filled it with sugar, and I thought I had gone to heaven right. Set me on a terrible path for the rest of my life.
Now, I'm just a little bit younger than you are, so my time in the cafeteria was a little different. on account of the war. Food rations changed what we ate. No more sugar-glazed donuts, no more sugar to spare. One memory that stands out is that there were some cadets stationed at ETSU. Well, it wasn't called that. It was East Tennessee State College at that time. But there was a big contingent of cadets there. Mother, along with some of the ladies in town, had a big party at our house for them. I grew up in the Cunningham house. I was just a little girl. And here were all these big, tall guys in uniform.
I remember, I was there. It was in the summertime, and the doors were open, the windows were up, and they had somehow or another gotten together refreshments.
Which wasn't that easy for that many people. That's why Mother had a lot of help to do this. They put their ration cards together. That was a benefit of being in town instead of out in the country. There was a lot of help available.
I remember other women being there. I just can't remember who they were. I remember the cadets. Each one of their faces, not much older than me, getting ready to put their lives on the line, fighting a war. Some just left high school. The radio was playing music. Two of the cadets moved the couches and tables out of the way and made room for dancing. Our mothers enjoyed the dances. It was almost as if they were able to dance with their own sons. Well, many of them had already left for the war. Then, the younger girls danced with them. We all took a turn. I danced with each one of them and asked them all the same question. What do you want to do after this war is over? I wanted to hear their dreams. I could already imagine their fears.
I remember the town did a lot for the boys stationed near here.
And those recovering who had been wounded.
Every Thanksgiving and Christmas, all of the women in town got together with the Goodwill Circle and they packed food and all kinds of goodies to take up to the soldiers' home. They'd play cards with all the people who could come down to the recreation room. Those guys would just love all those goodies. But they would always want to take some back to the ones in the ward who couldn't get down there, who were hurt too bad.
Well, the soldiers' home. Now it's the Veterans Administration. Back then, we do what we could for them.
Do you remember when Grace Halls took us up there to do square dancing as entertainment at the soldiers' home? I was in 5th grade, but Grace was part of our leadership with the Presbyterian Church, and she let me go with you teenagers. We'd take them baskets and things and feed them and go from ward to ward. Then we would dance and entertain them.
It was just a great way to live because Johnson City was a long way from here. And if you got to ride town to town, all the way from Jonesborough to Johnson City with a group of teenagers, you were living it up.
And if you were 10, it was really a big deal.
Well, I've met a lot of people in my 87 years, but I never forgot those faces at the summer party your mother threw for those cadets, or their dreams.
If you're just tuning in, you're listening to the Jonesborough Yarn Exchange Radio Hour on WETS 89.5 FM out of Johnson City, Tennessee.